God, I just wished I could eat today, the little girl said aloud until a millionaire appeared. Comment telling me what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and let me know what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sound of rotor blades slicing through the morning air echoed over the mirrored surface of Lake Tahoe, shattering the silence that enveloped the small wooden cabin on the shore. Arthur Vance, 52, adjusted his sunglasses as the helicopter descended smoothly toward the land he intended to inspect for his new hotel project. A seasoned entrepreneur in the hospitality industry, he had built an empire of boutique hotels across the West Coast, always with a keen eye for locations that offered exclusivity and natural beauty. When the blades finally stopped spinning and the engine fell silent, an unexpected sound reached Arthur's ears. It was quiet sobs, almost whispers, coming from the direction of the little yellow cabin just a few yards from where he had landed. He frowned, checked his watch, and realized it was only 7 in the morning. Who would be awake so early in this seemingly isolated place? Curious and slightly concerned, Arthur walked toward the sound, his dress shoes crunching against the gravelly terrain. As he approached the house, the sobs became more audible, accompanied by a child's voice murmuring something incomprehensible. Rounding the side of the simple but well-kept building, he stopped abruptly at a scene that made his heart ache. 2 identical little girls, who looked to be about 4 years old, were huddled together in the yard, sitting on the dirt ground. Their light brown hair was messy, as if they had slept poorly, and their simple clothes, faded floral dresses, were rumpled. Between them, a large golden retriever protected them like a silent guardian, his alert brown eyes watching every movement around them. Tears streamed down the girls' faces as one of them, slightly taller, whispered in a choked voice, "God, I just wished I could eat today." The phrase, spoken with the cruel innocence of childhood, hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. He had seen a lot in his life, built businesses from scratch, faced economic crises, but he had never witnessed such vulnerability in children so young. The retriever was the first to notice his presence, raising its ears and emitting a low, warning growl. The girls looked up simultaneously, revealing identical green irises, full of tears and fear. They shrank further into each other, as if trying to become invisible. "Hi, little ones," Arthur said in the softest voice he could manage, crouching down to their level. "My name is Arthur. Are you okay?" The taller girl, the one who had murmured the prayer, sniffled before answering in a trembling voice. "Grandpa and Grandma didn't wake up today, or yesterday." Her lower lip quivered as she added, "I'm Stella, and this is my sister Emily. She doesn't talk much to strangers." Emily indeed remained silent, but her large eyes never left Arthur's face, as if trying to decipher his intentions. The retriever, which Arthur now noticed was wearing a worn red collar, slightly relaxed its defensive posture but remained vigilant. "How long have you been alone here?" Arthur asked, feeling a knot forming in his stomach. The girls exchanged a silent glance, a communication only twins possess, before Stella replied, "We don't know how to count the days very well, but Buddy is really hungry too." The entrepreneur looked around, noticing details that had previously escaped him. The yard showed signs of recent neglect, wilted flowers in pots, a clothesline with clothes that seemed to have been there for days, and a general sense that normal life had abruptly stopped. The house itself was simple, but had something special, an architecture that suggested it was built decades ago, with faded blue shutters and a small but welcoming porch. "Are you hungry?" Arthur asked, already knowing the answer. "I can take you to get something to eat, and then we can talk about how to help you." It was then that something unexpected happened. Emily, who had been silent until then, grabbed her sister's arm tightly and shook her head vigorously. "We can't leave," she said for the first time, her voice even quieter than Stella's. "Grandma and Grandpa said we can never leave the house, that we have a special secret that needs to be protected." Stella nodded gravely, as if agreeing with an absolute truth. "They said bad people might come for us if we leave here, that we're only safe inside the house." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of secret could two 4-year-old children have? And why would their guardians keep them so isolated? He looked at the house again, this time with more investigative eyes, noticing that there were closed curtains on all the windows and that the property was enclosed by a low fence that created a clear demarcation of territory. "What did you eat yesterday?" he asked, changing his strategy. "We found crackers in the pantry," Stella replied, "but they ran out this morning, and Buddy ate his last food the day before yesterday." The retriever, as if understanding they were talking about him, cautiously approached Arthur and sniffed his outstretched hand. After a few seconds of canine analysis, the animal seemed to decide he was not an immediate threat and even allowed a gentle pat. "How about I bring food for you right here?" Arthur suggested. "You don't have to leave the house. I can get some tasty things and we can come back and talk more." The girls looked at each other again, and Arthur could see relief battling with suspicion on their little faces. Hunger was clearly winning over fear, but there was still hesitation. "Do you promise you won't tell the bad people where we are?" Emily asked, her voice filled with a seriousness that shouldn't exist in a 4-year-old. "I promise," Arthur replied, feeling that he had just made an oath far more profound than any business contract he had ever signed. As he walked away toward the helicopter, already mentally rearranging his entire day's schedule, Arthur couldn't get the image of the two girls clinging to each other out of his head and the question that echoed in his mind. What secret could two such young children carry that would justify so much fear and isolation? The helicopter cut through the Lake Tahoe sky again 2 hours later, carrying grocery bags that Arthur had personally bought in town. He couldn't remember the last time he had set foot in a regular market, usually delegating such tasks to staff. But something about those two girls had awakened a protective instinct in him that had been dormant for years. When he landed again near the yellow cabin, he found Stella and Emily exactly where he had left them, still huddled in the yard, with Buddy standing guard. The difference was that now they were looking at the sky with expectation, as if they had spent the entire 2 hours awaiting his return. "I brought some things," Arthur announced, carrying the heavy bags. "Sandwiches, fruit, milk, and special food for Buddy." Stella's eyes lit up, but Emily maintained her cautious posture. "You can leave it there on the ground," the more reserved girl said, pointing to a spot a few yards away. Grandma always said not to let strangers in the house. Arthur respected the request, placing the bags at the indicated spot and stepping back. It was then that he noticed something he had missed on his first visit. The house's windows, despite having closed curtains, showed signs that someone had been watching from inside just a short while ago. One of the curtains was still swaying slightly. "Are you sure you're alone?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "We are," Stella answered quickly, but Arthur caught a nervous glance she shot toward one of the back windows. "It's just me, Emily, and Buddy." As the girls cautiously approached the food, Arthur watched their movements. There was something almost ritualistic in the way they did everything together, always checking with each other before any action. Stella picked up a sandwich and immediately broke it in half, offering half to Emily before even taking a bite herself. The gesture was so natural that it was clearly part of a long-established routine. "How long have you lived here with your grandparents?" Arthur asked, sitting on the ground at a respectful distance. "Always," Stella replied, chewing with relish on the ham sandwich. "Since we were very little. Grandma Celia used to say we arrived here when we were babies." And Grandpa Jacob, Emily added softly, said we were a gift that appeared on their doorstep on a rainy night. Arthur frowned. The story sounded like something out of a fairy tale, and his life experience told him that such stories usually hid more complex truths. Do you remember anything else about how you got here? The girls exchanged another of those silent glances that seemed to have their own language. Grandma said it wasn't important to remember the before, Stella said, that the important thing was that we were safe here. Safe from what? Arthur gently insisted. It was Emily who answered this time, her voice even lower. From the bad people who wanted to separate us. Grandma said that in the world out there, twin sisters like us could be taken to different places, and we would never see each other again. Arthur's heart tightened. What trauma had these children experienced for their guardians to deem it necessary to keep them completely isolated? He looked around, noticing for the first time that there were no signs of other houses nearby. The property was secluded, surrounded by native forest and accessible only by a dirt road he had seen from above. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Eleanor, his wife. "Where are you? We have a meeting with the investors in an hour." He had completely forgotten about the appointment. He looked at the girls, who were now sharing an apple with the same mathematical precision with which they had shared the sandwich. "I need to take care of something important," he said, standing up, "but I'll be back later today. Will you be all right here?" "We will," Stella replied, but there was anxiety in her voice. "Are you really coming back?" "I promise," Arthur said, and once again he felt the weight of a promise that was much more than simple words. During the flight back to the city, his mind buzzed with questions. What kind of situation had led two children to live in such seclusion? And why did he, a pragmatic businessman, feel such a strong compulsion to protect them? The answer to the last question came like a stab when he remembered Leo, the son he had lost at the age of 3 to a pneumonia that progressed too quickly for doctors to reverse. Leo would be almost the same age as Stella and Emily today if he were alive. Eleanor was waiting for him in the 30th floor office of the commercial building that housed the headquarters of Vance Hotels. At 45, she maintained the icy elegance that had attracted Arthur 20 years ago, but which now seemed more like armor than natural charm. Her blonde hair was tied in a perfect bun, and her navy blue suit was wrinkle-free. "You're late," she said without looking up from the documents she was analyzing. "And I cancelled the site inspection. The investors want an answer about the coastal expansion by Friday." "Eleanor, we need to talk about something," Arthur began, but she cut him off with an impatient gesture. "If it's about postponing the Miami trip again, I've already told you we can't. The international contacts won't wait indefinitely. It's not about Miami. It's about 2 children I found today." For the first time, Eleanor looked up from the papers, and Arthur saw in her eyes an expression he knew well. The cold irritation she showed whenever he deviated from the subjects she considered priorities. "Children?" she repeated, as if the word were from a foreign language. Arthur told her about Stella and Emily, about the situation he had found them in, about the strange story they had told. As he spoke, he saw Eleanor's face progressively hardening. "And what exactly do you intend to do?" she asked when he finished. "Help them. They're alone, starving, and clearly need medical care and—" "Arthur," Eleanor interrupted, her voice taking on that patronizing tone he hated. "You can't just adopt 2 unknown children. There are legal procedures, investigations, institutions responsible for this." "I know that. But for now they need immediate help." Eleanor stood up and walked to the panoramic window that offered a view of the entire city. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment," she said without turning around. "It's understandable given what happened with Leo. But these children are not Leo, Arthur, and you can't save him by saving them." The mention of their deceased son was like a slap in the face. Arthur felt anger rise in his chest, but he forced himself to keep his voice controlled. "This has nothing to do with Leo. It has everything to do with him," Eleanor retorted, finally turning to face him. "And you know it." At that moment, Arthur realized something that had bothered him for years, but that he had never been able to put into words. Eleanor had become too cold after the loss of their son. While he had dived into work to escape the pain, she had built emotional walls that seemed impenetrable. "I'm going back there this afternoon," he announced, "with or without your support." "Then it will be without," she replied, returning to her desk, "and I hope you think carefully about the consequences of this for our business." When Arthur left the office, a certainty had formed in his mind. No matter what it cost, he would not abandon Stella and Emily. There was something about those girls that touched a part of his soul he thought had died along with Leo. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone stop him from doing the right thing. The sun was already beginning to set when Arthur returned to the yellow cabin, this time bringing not only food, but also blankets, children's clothes, and a few toys he had impulsively bought at a downtown store. His heart settled when he saw the two girls playing in the yard with sticks, drawing pictures in the dirt, while Buddy rested in the shade of the property's only tree. "Are you all right?" he asked, approaching with the new bags. "We are," Stella replied, but Arthur noticed she seemed paler than in the morning. "Emily said she saw you flying in the sky again." Emily nodded shyly, pointing at the helicopter. "It's very noisy," she said, "but pretty." As he organized the supplies, Arthur observed the house more closely. During the day, some details had become more evident. The blue shutters were well maintained, suggesting recent care, and there were pots with plants that, although some were withered, showed signs of having been watered until a few days ago. "Can you show me where the bedrooms are?" he asked. "I brought warmer blankets." The girls hesitated, exchanging those meaningful glances again. It was Stella who answered. "Grandma said we couldn't let anyone in the house, that it was dangerous." "I understand," Arthur said, respecting the established boundary. "How about I leave everything out here and you take it inside when you want?" As night approached, he realized he couldn't just leave and let two 4-year-old children be alone again. "Would you mind if I stayed out here tonight, just to make sure you're safe?" "You'd sleep outside?" Emily asked, seeming genuinely surprised by the idea. "In the helicopter, it's comfortable," Arthur lied, knowing it would be a very uncomfortable night, but unable to abandon the girls. "Grandpa Jacob sometimes slept on the porch when it was very hot," Stella commented. "He said he liked listening to the crickets sing." The mention of their grandparents brought a melancholic expression to the girls' faces. Arthur realized they hadn't fully processed what had happened, perhaps because they were too young to understand the finality of the situation. "Do you want to talk about your grandparents?" he asked gently. "Grandma Celia made the best blueberry muffins in the world," Stella said, her eyes filling with tears. "And she always divided everything perfectly between me and Emily, so no one would get jealous. Grandpa Jacob taught me to recognize the birds by their songs," Emily added, her voice almost a whisper. "He knew the name of everyone that came to the yard." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. It was clear that despite their isolation, the girls had been deeply loved by their guardians. This made the situation even more complex and touching. As the stars appeared in the clear Nevada sky, the girls seemed to accept his presence. They sat on the porch, but kept the house door firmly closed, as if protecting something very precious inside. "Can I ask a question?" Arthur said. "You said you have a special secret. Can you tell me what kind of secret?" The girls looked at each other with an intensity that seemed very mature for their age. "We can't," Stella said finally. "Grandma made us promise." "But," Emily added hesitantly, "maybe. If you stay with us for a long time, maybe we can trust you." The night brought sounds Arthur hadn't expected. Besides the chirping of crickets the grandfather had mentioned, there were noises coming from inside the house. Soft footsteps, as if someone were moving carefully to avoid making noise. When he mentioned this to the girls, they became visibly nervous. "It's just the wind," Stella said quickly. "The house is old. It makes strange noises." But Arthur was sure it wasn't the wind. There was something or someone inside the house. His mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe the grandparents weren't really dead, just sick. Or maybe there was someone else taking care of the girls in secret. Around 10 at night, the girls announced they needed to go to sleep. "We always sleep early," Stella explained. "Grandma said girls need a lot of sleep to grow strong." "Will you be okay alone?" Arthur asked, still disturbed by the noises he had heard. "We always are," Emily replied, "and Buddy takes care of us." After the girls went inside and Arthur heard the lock click shut, he settled as best he could on the helicopter seat, but sleep wouldn't come. His thoughts drifted between the isolated girls, Eleanor's cold reaction, and the painful memories of Leo that had resurfaced with full force. It was around midnight that something happened that would completely change his perspective on the situation. A soft light came on in one of the back windows of the house, a window he was sure had remained dark all day, and for a few seconds he could clearly see the silhouette of an adult figure moving around the room. His heart raced. There was definitely someone else in the house, someone the girls were hiding, or perhaps someone who was hiding from the girls themselves. The possibilities that ran through his mind ranged from relatively innocent scenarios to potentially dangerous situations. Arthur waited until he was sure the light had gone out again before silently approaching the house. He pressed his ear to the wall and could hear low murmurs, a female voice that definitely did not belong to either Stella or Emily. It was an adult voice, speaking in a low, urgent tone, as if giving instructions or making recommendations. He tried to understand the words, but the distance and the wall material made it impossible to decipher the content of the conversation. What he could perceive was that the voice paused occasionally, as if waiting for answers, and that there was a tone of concern, perhaps even fear, in the inflections he could catch. When he returned to the helicopter, Arthur knew the situation was far more complex than he had initially imagined. The girls weren't really alone, but for some reason they were being instructed to hide the presence of whoever was with them. Why? Who was this mysterious person? And most importantly, were the girls in danger or protected by this hidden presence? The next morning, as the first light of dawn began to brighten the horizon over the lake, Arthur made a decision that would change the course of everything. He would not go home until he discovered the truth about Stella and Emily. It didn't matter how many meetings he had to cancel, how many deals were compromised, or how furious Eleanor became. There was something deeply wrong with this situation, and his conscience would not allow him to simply ignore two children in need, especially when all his paternal fibers were screaming that they needed protection. The sound of the house door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Stella appeared on the porch, looking surprised to see him still there. "You really stayed," she said, and for the first time since he had met her, Arthur saw a genuine smile light up her little face. At that moment, watching that brave girl who cared for her shyer sister with such dedication, Arthur knew he would do anything to protect them, even if it meant confronting secrets that someone was desperate to keep buried. 3 days had passed since Arthur decided to stay close to the girl's house. He had established a routine of flying to the city every morning to handle urgent business matters and returning in the late afternoon with supplies. Eleanor had stopped answering his calls, communicating only through cold messages about cancelled meetings and missed opportunities. On this particular morning, Arthur arrived at the yellow cabin, carrying a folder of documents along with the usual bags of food. During his research in town, he had discovered something intriguing about the property where the girls lived. At the county recorder's office, the clerks had been surprised by his interest in the small lake house. "Mr. Vance," the clerk said, consulting old records, "this property has an interesting history. It was originally registered in 1952 and since then has only had 2 transfers of ownership." "Who are the current owners?" Arthur asked. "According to our records, Jacob Reed and his wife Celia Reed. But there's something peculiar," the man frowned as he leafed through yellow documents. "There are some marginal notes indicating mineral rights associated with the land, a rare thing for such a small property." Mineral rights. The words echoed in Arthur's mind as he approached the house that morning. The Lake Tahoe area had a rich history of mining, especially for silver and other valuable minerals. If the girls' property really had mineral rights, it could explain why someone would want to keep them isolated and hidden. "Good morning, girls," he greeted, finding Stella and Emily sitting on the porch. Over the past few days, they had become visibly more comfortable with his presence, although they still maintained the strict rule of not letting him inside the house. "Did Mr. Arthur bring more books?" Stella asked, referring to the children's books he had bought the day before. To his surprise, the girls could read with impressive fluency for their age. "I did," he replied, but he was more interested in asking some careful questions about the property. "Stella, Emily, do you know if your grandparents ever talked about this house having something special?" The girls exchanged that silent look again. "Grandma said our house was special because it had the best lake in all of Lake Tahoe," Emily said, "and because Grandpa found pretty little rocks in the yard." "Pretty little rocks," Arthur repeated, interested. "Grandpa kept them in a little box," Stella explained. "He said they were treasures the earth gave to good people." Before Arthur could ask more about these rocks, a familiar sound cut through the air, helicopter blades. But it wasn't his helicopter. This aircraft was larger, more robust, and was approaching the property quickly. The girls immediately stood up, clearly frightened. "We don't know that noise," Stella said, grabbing Emily's hand. The helicopter landed about 50 yards from the house, kicking up a cloud of dust. When the engine fell silent and the door opened, Arthur felt his stomach sink. The figure who emerged from the aircraft was unmistakable. Daniel Vance, his younger brother. Daniel, at 48, had the same tall stature as Arthur, but where the older brother had gained a few pounds and expression lines over the years, Daniel maintained the meticulously cared-for appearance of someone who spent fortunes on exclusive gyms and cosmetic treatments. His dark hair was perfectly styled and his light-colored suit was wrinkle-free, even after a helicopter trip. "Arthur," Daniel said, approaching with decisive steps, "Eleanor told me about your new obsession." The girls cowered behind Arthur, who instinctively took a protective stance. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "I came to get my older brother and bring him back to reality," Daniel replied, but his eyes were fixed on the girls. To Arthur's surprise, his brother's expression changed drastically when he saw Stella and Emily. Daniel's face paled visibly, as if he had seen ghosts. "My God," Daniel muttered almost to himself. "It can't be." "Do you know these girls?" Arthur asked, noticing his brother's strange reaction. Daniel seemed to recover quickly, forcing a neutral expression. "Of course not. How could I know 2 lost children in the middle of nowhere?" But Arthur knew his brother too well not to realize he was lying. There was something in the way Daniel avoided looking directly at the girls, in the tension of his jaw, in the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "Arthur," Daniel continued, forcing a casual tone, "you need to be rational. These children need to be handed over to the proper authorities. We can't just informally adopt them." "Why not?" Arthur asked, carefully studying his brother's reactions. Because there are legal procedures, investigations. You know nothing about their origin, about potential relatives, about..." Daniel stopped abruptly, as if he realized he was talking too much. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Emily, who rarely spoke in the presence of strangers, let go of Stella's hand and took a few steps toward Daniel. She studied him with those piercing green eyes for several seconds before saying, "You look like someone I met in a dream." Daniel recoiled as if he'd been slapped. I don't know what this child is talking about." "She sometimes has very vivid dreams," Stella said, seeming concerned by the strange man's reaction. "She dreams of a very pretty lady who cried a lot and begged someone not to leave." This time it was impossible for Daniel to hide his reaction. He staggered slightly, leaning against the side of the helicopter. I need to talk to you in private, Arthur." The two brothers moved a few yards away, leaving the girls near the house under Buddy's watchful care. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, ruining his perfect hairstyle. "Arthur, you don't understand the situation you're getting yourself into," he said, his voice filled with an emotion Arthur couldn't identify. "Then explain it to me," Arthur replied, "because it's clear you know more about these girls than you're admitting." Daniel looked back at Stella and Emily, who were watching them curiously from the porch. "There are things, complicated family situations you don't know about. Things that happened before you married Eleanor." "What things?" I was married before I met Sandra," Daniel confessed reluctantly. "A woman named Isabella. It was a tumultuous relationship." Arthur frowned. He knew Sandra, Daniel's current wife, but had never heard of a previous marriage. "And what does that have to do with Stella and Emily?" "Isabella. She went abroad after our divorce," Daniel said, avoiding his brother's gaze. "Said she wanted to start a new life away from everything." "Daniel," Arthur said slowly, "are you telling me that these girls—" "I'm not saying anything," Daniel interrupted sharply. "I'm just explaining why you need to hand these children over to the authorities immediately. There are complex family situations that could result in serious legal problems." At that moment, Arthur understood that he was facing something much bigger than two orphaned children in need of help. There were family secrets, hidden connections, and possibly property rights at stake. And most disturbingly, his own brother was involved in some way and was clearly trying to cover something up. "Daniel," he said in a firm voice, "I am not abandoning these girls. If you know something about them, you'd better tell me now." "You don't understand," Daniel retorted, his mask of calm finally cracking. "If you keep getting involved with them, you could destroy everything our family has built. Eleanor is already furious. Business is being hurt, and there are people who won't be happy to know these children have been found." "What people?" But Daniel was already walking back to his helicopter. "I warned you," he shouted over the noise of the starting engine. "What happens from now on is your responsibility." As Daniel's helicopter disappeared over the horizon, Arthur stood motionless, processing the disturbing conversation he had just had. He looked at the girls, who were still watching him from the porch, and felt a fierce determination grow in his chest. No matter what secrets his family was hiding, no matter how many veiled threats he received, Stella and Emily needed protection, and he would be that protection, whatever the cost. The tension left by Daniel's visit hung in the air like a storm cloud as Arthur approached the girls on the porch. Stella and Emily watched him with those curious green eyes, clearly sensing that something important had happened, but not understanding exactly what. "The man who looked like you left very angry," Stella commented. "He didn't like us." "Sometimes adults get worried about complicated things," Arthur explained, sitting on the porch steps, "but you don't need to worry about that." Emily, who had remained silent throughout the interaction with Daniel, approached Arthur with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Arthur, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Emily. I didn't dream about that man. I've seen him before, but I don't know where. She paused as if trying to organize fragmented memories. And there's more. There's a person living in our attic. Stella's eyes widened and she motioned for her sister to be quiet. Emily, you promised. But he's good, Emily insisted, looking directly at Arthur. He takes care of us when we're scared. It's not true that we're alone. Arthur felt his heart race. His suspicions about the nighttime noises were correct. Who is this person? The girls exchanged another of those meaningful glances. It was Stella who answered in a hesitant voice. It's Aunt Isabella. She said she had to hide because bad people were looking for her. Isabella, the name Daniel had mentioned, his ex-wife who had supposedly gone abroad. Arthur felt the pieces of a complex puzzle begin to fit together, revealing a much more disturbing picture than he had imagined. Is Aunt Isabella in the attic now? He asked gently. She is, Emily confirmed, but she only comes down at night when she's sure no one is around. She's very scared. Scared of what? Of the man who came here today, Stella said quietly. She said that if he found her, bad things would happen. Arthur processed this information with growing alarm. Isabella hadn't gone abroad as Daniel had claimed. She was hidden here, in the attic of the house, secretly caring for the girls. And she was so afraid of Daniel that she remained hidden even when it meant letting 2 4-year-old children face strangers alone. Girls, he said carefully, do you think Aunt Isabella would talk to me? I promise I won't tell anyone where she is. The twins consulted each other silently once more. We'll ask her, Stella said finally, but first you have to promise one thing. What do you want me to promise? That you won't let anyone separate us, Emily said with touching seriousness. Aunt Isabella said bad people want to put us in different places, but I never want to be away from Stella. I promise, Arthur said, and once again felt the profound weight of that promise. The girls went into the house, leaving Arthur waiting on the porch with Buddy. About 15 minutes later, the door opened again, and a woman he didn't recognize appeared hesitantly in the doorway. Isabella looked to be about 35, but her face showed signs of great stress and worry. She was too thin, like someone who had been eating poorly for a long time, and her brown hair was cut irregularly, as if she had cut it herself with dull scissors. Her eyes were the same green as the girls', a resemblance that left Arthur in no doubt about the family relationship. You must be Arthur, she said, her voice trembling but determined. The girls said you've been kind to them. And you must be Isabella, he replied, their mother. Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes. Yes, I am their mother. Although I've been a terrible one, hiding while they faced the world alone. Why are you hiding? Isabella stepped out of the house completely, but stayed close to the door, as if ready to flee at any moment. Because Daniel said that if I showed up again, he would make sure I lost the girls forever. He has lawyers, influence, money, and I have nothing. But the girls were being cared for by their grandparents, Jacob and Celia. They were my aunt and uncle, Isabella explained. Uncle Jacob was my mother's brother. When I needed to run away from Daniel, they agreed to take care of the girls temporarily. But when they got sick, I had to come back. Run away from Daniel. Did he threaten you? Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to shield herself from painful memories. Daniel is very different from the person he shows in public. When he found out I was pregnant with twins, he was furious. He said 2 babies would ruin his career plans, that I had done it on purpose to trap him in the marriage. And after they were born, it got worse. He started disappearing for days without explanation. Would come back drunk, screaming that the girls were too loud, too expensive, too much trouble. When they were 6 months old, he started talking about giving one of them up for adoption. He said 2 children were too much for any couple. Arthur felt nausea rising in his stomach. He wanted to separate the girls. He did, and when I opposed it, he became violent. He said that if I didn't agree to give one of the girls away, he would make sure I lost both of them through the courts, that he would prove I was an unfit mother. The puzzle pieces began to form a terrifying picture. "Is that why you left the girls with Jacob and Celia?" "I didn't want to," Isabella burst out, tears now streaming freely. "But Daniel had hired lawyers. He was building a case against me. Uncle Jacob suggested I disappear for a while, let things cool down, and that he would take care of the girls until I could safely return. But you never came back. I tried several times, but Daniel had people watching my aunt and uncle's house. Whenever I got close, I'd receive threatening messages. So I got a job in a neighboring town, saved up money, and was planning to get the girls when..." Her voice broke. "When Uncle Jacob and Aunt Celia suddenly got sick, and you came back to take care of the girls. I arrived 3 days before they passed. They were very weak, but they managed to explain to me about the property documents, about the mineral rights that belong to the girls, and about why Daniel really wants to control them." Arthur leaned forward. "What mineral rights?" "This property was left to the girls by my grandfather. Not just the house, but mining rights over a much larger area. Uncle Jacob discovered that there are valuable deposits underground. Daniel knows this, and he wants to gain legal control of the girls to access those rights." "Is that why he wants to separate them?" "Separated children are easier to control legally, especially if one of them is placed under his direct care." Isabella wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "He doesn't care about Stella and Emily as people. To him, they are just obstacles to a fortune." At that moment, Arthur fully understood why Daniel had been so disturbed to see the girls, why he had insisted so much that they be handed over to the authorities. It wasn't genuine concern, it was greed disguised as family responsibility. "Isabella," he said, "you can't keep hiding. The girls need you, and you have legal rights as their mother. But Daniel has so much power. How can I fight him?" "You won't fight alone," Arthur promised, making a decision that would change everything. "I will help you. I will use all my resources to ensure that Daniel doesn't get his hands on the girls or their property." For the first time since she had left the house, Isabella smiled, a weak but hopeful smile. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Because these girls need protection, and because my brother is clearly not the man I thought I knew." At that moment, Stella and Emily came out of the house, ran to Isabella, and clung to her like koalas on a tree. "Aunt Isabella, you don't have to hide anymore?" Stella asked. "We'll see, my dear," Isabella replied, kissing the top of both girls' heads. "We'll see." But as he watched the emotional reunion, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wouldn't give up easily, and that the battle for the protection of Stella and Emily was just beginning. The next morning brought a deceptive calm to the yellow cabin. Isabella had spent her first night in months sleeping in a real bed instead of hiding in the stuffy attic. The girls seemed more relaxed, playing in the yard under the morning sun while Buddy ran in circles around them, clearly relieved to have his whole family reunited. Arthur had returned early, bringing not only supplies but also some documents he had requested from his lawyers overnight. As he watched Stella and Emily teaching simple tricks to the Labrador, he couldn't help but notice how incredibly close they were, finishing each other's sentences and reacting to each other's feelings as if they were a single entity split into two bodies. "Have they always been like this?" he asked Isabella, who was preparing a simple coffee on the porch's wood-burning stove. "Since they were born," she replied with a nostalgic smile. "The doctors said it was rare, even for twins. They seemed to have a special connection. When one got hurt, the other would cry. When one got sick, the other would show similar symptoms." Arthur watched the girls more closely. At that very moment, Stella tripped and fell, scraping her knee. Immediately, Emily dropped what she was doing and ran to her sister, not just to comfort her, but touching her own knee as if she had also been hurt. "That's why Daniel wanted to separate them," he murmured, a terrible realization dawning on him. "Exactly," Isabella confirmed, her voice turning bitter. "He said it was abnormal and that they needed to learn to be individuals. But I knew that if they were separated, both would be devastated. It's like trying to separate two halves of the same soul." The sound of an approaching engine interrupted the conversation. But this time it wasn't a helicopter. It was a black sedan, kicking up dust on the dirt road leading to the property. Isabella paled instantly and took a step toward the house, her flight instincts kicking in. "Calm down," Arthur said, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "Let me see who it is first." The car stopped a few yards from the house, and to Arthur's surprise, it was Eleanor who got out. His wife was impeccable as always, wearing a white skirt and blazer set that seemed completely out of place in the rural setting. Her high heels sank into the loose dirt as she approached with an expression Arthur knew well: cold determination. "Arthur," she said without preamble, "we need to talk. Now." "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "I came to get my husband and bring him back to his senses," she replied, her eyes quickly scanning the scene. The girls standing in the yard, Isabella trying to hide behind a porch pillar, and Arthur clearly protecting them both. "This is Isabella," Arthur said, deciding to face the situation head-on. "Stella and Emily's mother, and these are the girls I told you about." Eleanor examined Isabella with the calculating gaze she used to assess business competitors. "So you're Daniel's ex-wife," she said finally, "the one who was supposedly abroad." Isabella flinched slightly but stood her ground. "I never left the country. I've been hiding to protect my daughters." "Protect them from what exactly?" "It would be from your brother-in-law," Isabella replied with growing courage, "who threatened to take my daughters from me and separate them." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Daniel may be many things, but he is not a monster. There must be some misunderstanding here." "There is no misunderstanding," Arthur interrupted, feeling his irritation grow. "Eleanor, Daniel tried to force the separation of two 4-year-old children. He threatened their mother, and now I've discovered he's interested in the property's mineral rights." For a moment, something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, an expression Arthur couldn't quite identify, but it seemed like a mix of surprise and recognition. "Mineral rights?" she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Eleanor," Arthur said slowly, studying his wife's face, "did you know about this?" Daniel may have mentioned something about properties with development potential in the region," she admitted reluctantly. "Development?" Isabella exploded. "They want to steal my daughter's inheritance." Eleanor turned to Isabella with a frosty expression. "No one is stealing anything. But you have to understand that two small children can't manage mineral resources. They need responsible guardians, people with business experience." "Like you?" Arthur interrupted, a terrible understanding forming. "Like us," Eleanor confirmed without hesitation. "Arthur, be realistic. These children need stability, education, proper medical care, and you have the resources to provide all of that. But that means separating the girls from their mother. It means giving them opportunities that this woman," Eleanor gestured dismissively toward Isabella, "clearly cannot offer." At that moment, Stella and Emily approached, clearly sensing the tension between the adults. They instinctively positioned themselves between Isabella and Eleanor, as if they felt their mother needed protection. "Is this the pretty lady that Daddy Arthur married?" Stella asked, looking at Eleanor with childlike curiosity. Eleanor looked down at the girls, and Arthur saw her expression soften slightly. For a moment, he remembered the woman he had fallen in love with years ago, before Leo, before the losses that had made them strangers to each other. "Hello, girls," Eleanor said, crouching to their level. "You are very beautiful." "Thank you," Emily replied shyly. "Do you want to see our drawings? We make very pretty birds." "Maybe later," Eleanor said, but Arthur noticed she seemed genuinely touched by the girl's innocence. Standing up, Eleanor addressed Arthur again. "We need to talk in private," she said, indicating a spot away from the girls and Isabella. Reluctantly, Arthur followed her. When they were out of earshot, Eleanor turned to him with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Genuine vulnerability. "Arthur, I understand what's happening here," she said softly. "You see these girls and you think of Leo. You see a chance to be the father you couldn't be for long enough." The words hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. "This has nothing to do with Leo." "It has everything to do with Leo," Eleanor replied, tears welling in her eyes. "And I understand because I feel the same way. When I look at these girls, I see the family we lost. I see the possibility of healing something that was broken inside us." Arthur was shocked. For years, Eleanor had refused to talk about Leo, had emotionally shut down whenever the subject was mentioned. Seeing her openly admit her feelings was like witnessing a miracle. "But," she continued, "we can't save these children by destroying our own family. Daniel is your brother, and if you publicly oppose him on this issue, it will create a war that could destroy both of your businesses. Business doesn't matter if two children are in danger." "And what if there is no real danger?" Eleanor asked. "What if Daniel truly believes he's doing what's best for the girls? And what if you're seeing villains where there are just complicated people making difficult decisions?" Arthur looked back to where Stella and Emily were playing with Isabella, their laughter echoing in the morning air. "Eleanor, you saw how Daniel reacted when he saw the girls. There was guilt in those eyes. And fear." "Perhaps," she admitted, "but there was something else too. Did you notice how he looked at them, as if he were seeing ghosts?" "What do you mean?" Eleanor hesitated for a long moment, as if debating internally whether to continue. "Arthur, there are things about Daniel's past you don't know. Things about why his marriage to Isabella really ended." "What things?" "Promise me you'll keep an open mind to the possibility that the truth is more complicated than it seems." "Eleanor, what things?" She took a deep breath. "Daniel once told me, after drinking a lot, that she had threatened to take the girls away from him if he didn't do exactly what she wanted, that she was unstable, possessive, and that he had become afraid for the well-being of his own daughters." The revelation left Arthur stunned. "Are you suggesting that Isabella is the real threat?" "I'm suggesting that maybe there are two sides to this story, and that before you destroy your relationship with your only brother, maybe you should investigate a little more." At that moment, the sound of another approaching car cut through the air. This one was smaller, older, and when it stopped, an unknown man got out, someone who clearly didn't belong in that rural environment. He wore a cheap, dark suit and carried an official-looking briefcase. "I'm looking for the girls, Stella and Emily Reed," he announced. "I'm from Child Protective Services in Lake Tahoe." The silence that followed the man's announcement from Child Protective Services was deafening. Arthur felt his blood run cold as he watched Isabella turn pale and instinctively pull the girls closer. Stella and Emily, sensing the sudden tension, clung to their mother's legs like scared little koalas. "I'm Robert Miller, a social worker," the man continued, showing an official ID. "We received an anonymous tip about two unaccompanied minors on this property." "Anonymous tip?" Arthur repeated, but a terrible suspicion was already forming in his mind. His eyes met Eleanor's, who quickly looked away. "The children are not unaccompanied," Isabella said, her voice trembling but determined. "I am their mother, Isabella Reed." Robert consulted some papers in his briefcase. "Ms. Reed, according to our records, you abandoned these children more than 4 years ago. They were under the care of their grandparents, Jacob and Celia Reed, who recently passed away. "I didn't abandon anyone," Isabella exploded. "I was forced to leave to protect them." "That will have to be properly investigated," Robert replied with the bureaucratic neutrality Arthur knew well. "In the meantime, the children need to be placed in a safe and controlled environment." "They are already in a safe environment," Arthur interrupted. "They are with their mother." Robert examined him with renewed interest. "And you are?" "Arthur Vance, a local businessman. I'm helping this family." "I see," Robert said, taking notes. "But you understand that our priority is the children's well-being. We need to conduct a proper assessment of the family situation before allowing them to remain here." At that moment, Emily let go of Isabella's legs and approached Robert with that surprising courage she sometimes showed. "Sir, we don't want to leave our mommy," she said in a small but firm voice. "She takes very good care of us." "And we don't want to be separated," Stella added, joining her sister. "Everyone always wants to separate us, but we're a family." Robert crouched down to the girl's level, his expression softening slightly. "No one wants to separate you girls, but we need to make sure you're safe and well cared for." "We are!" Emily insisted. "Mommy Isabella reads us stories, and Uncle Arthur brought us yummy food, and Buddy protects us from everything." As if on cue, the Labrador approached and positioned himself between the girls and Robert, not aggressively, but clearly protectively. Robert stood up and addressed the adults. "I need to ask a few questions and document the current situation. Ms. Reed, do you have documents to prove your identity and relationship with the children?" Isabella exchanged a nervous glance with Arthur. Some documents are in the house, but others, I couldn't take them when I had to leave." "That's problematic," Robert murmured. "Without proper documentation, it's difficult to prove legal custody." "Wait a moment," Eleanor said, speaking for the first time since Robert arrived. "Mr. Miller, may I have a private word with you?" Arthur watched with growing alarm as Eleanor and Robert moved a few yards away. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see his wife's gestures, the way she discreetly pointed at Isabella, how Robert carefully jotted down every word she said. "Mommy," Stella whispered, tugging on Isabella's skirt, "is that lady saying bad things about us?" "I don't know, my dear," Isabella replied, but Arthur could see she was also realizing the nature of the conversation between Eleanor and the social worker. When the two returned, Robert's expression had become more serious. "Ms. Reed, based on the information I've received, I'm afraid it will be necessary to take the children for a more detailed evaluation." "What information?" Arthur demanded. Robert consulted his notes. "Information about emotional instability, possible prior neglect, and questionable circumstances surrounding your disappearance for several years." Arthur turned to Eleanor, anger swelling in his chest. "What did you say to him?" "Just the truth," she answered defensively, "that this woman abandoned her daughters for years, that she's living like a fugitive, and that the children could be at risk." "Eleanor!" "Arthur, be rational. You've known this woman for less than 24 hours. How can you be sure she's telling the truth about anything?" Isabella hugged the girls tighter, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged Robert, "don't separate my daughters from me. I can explain everything. I can prove I'm a good mother." "Ma'am, I understand your distress," Robert said, but his voice had become firmer. "But the decision has been made. The children need to come with us for a proper evaluation." "No!" Stella shouted. "We don't want to go." Emily started crying, clinging even tighter to Isabella. "Mommy, don't let them take us." It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Buddy, who had been silently observing the whole situation, started barking. Not aggressive barks, but alert barks, as if trying to warn of something. Everyone looked in the direction the dog was looking and saw another car approaching on the dirt road. It was a luxurious silver sedan, and when it stopped, Daniel got out with a triumphant expression on his face. "I've arrived at the right time, I see," he said, approaching the group. "Daniel," Arthur said, his voice laced with accusation, "did you call CPS?" "I did what was necessary to protect two innocent children," Daniel replied, but his eyes were fixed on Isabella with an intensity that made Arthur uncomfortable. Isabella recoiled, pulling the girls with her. "Daniel, please leave us alone. You've already done enough harm." "I've done harm?" Daniel repeated, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. "Who disappeared for 4 years? Who abandoned 2 small children with elderly relatives? Who is living like a criminal?" "You know very well why I had to leave," Isabella retorted, finding courage in her desperation. "Ah, yes," Daniel said with a cruel smile. "Your paranoid fantasies about imaginary threats." Robert watched the interaction with professional interest. "Mr. Daniel Vance, I presume." "Mrs. Eleanor Vance told me you are the children's biological father." "I am," Daniel confirmed, "and as their father, I am demanding they be removed from this unstable situation immediately." Arthur felt as if the ground were collapsing beneath his feet. "Daniel, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," his brother replied. "These children deserve stability, a proper education, medical care, things a fugitive woman clearly cannot provide." "And you can?" Arthur asked bitterly. "I can," Daniel said. "I have resources, influence, financial stability, everything they need." At that moment, Emily broke away from Isabella and ran toward Daniel but stopped a few feet from him. "Daddy," she said, using the word for the first time, "why do you want Mommy to go away?" The question, asked with all the innocence of a 4-year-old child, hit Daniel like a slap. For a moment, his mask of superiority faltered, and Arthur saw something like pain cross his face. I want what's best for you too," Daniel said, but his voice no longer sounded so confident. "What's best for us is to stay together with Mommy," Stella said, joining her sister. "Why do adults never understand that?" Robert cleared his throat. "Based on what I've observed today, I recommend that the children be temporarily placed in neutral care while this family situation is properly resolved. There are complex issues here that need investigation." "No!" the 2 girls shouted simultaneously, but before anyone could react, Isabella made a desperate decision. "Run!" she yelled at the girls. "Run into the forest and hide like I taught you." Without hesitation, Stella and Emily shot off toward the woods surrounding the property, with Buddy barking and running after them. Robert tried to follow, but the Labrador positioned himself between him and the girls, growling low. "This only makes things worse," Eleanor shouted. "On the contrary," Daniel said, with sinister satisfaction, "this proves exactly what I was saying, an unstable mother who teaches her daughters to run from the authorities." Arthur looked at Isabella, who was trembling but maintained a defiant expression. He looked at Eleanor, who seemed genuinely shocked by the turn of events. He looked at Daniel, who was clearly savoring his moment of triumph. And then he looked at the forest, where 2 scared little girls were hiding, probably more confused and terrified than they had ever been in their short lives. In that moment, Arthur realized he had a choice to make. A choice that would define not only Stella and Emily's future, but also what kind of man he truly was. The forest had swallowed Stella and Emily as if they had never existed. Robert scoured the edge of the woods for nearly an hour, calling the girls names, while Daniel paced back and forth, clearly irritated by the unexpected complication. Eleanor remained near the car, her high heels completely unsuitable for any kind of search on uneven terrain. Arthur, on the other hand, was talking quietly with Isabella near the house. "Where did they go?" he asked in a low voice. "There's a small cave about 200 yards into the woods," Isabella whispered. "Uncle Jacob showed it to them when they were younger, said it was a safe place if something bad happened. They know how to stay quiet there." "How long can they stay hidden?" "Hours, if necessary. I took crackers and water there last week, just in case." Isabella looked nervously at Robert, who was still searching. Arthur, I don't know what to do anymore. If they come back now, they'll be taken away. If they don't come back, Daniel will use it as proof that you're an irresponsible mother. Arthur finished grimly. At that moment, Robert approached, clearly frustrated. Ms. Reed, I need you to call your daughters back. This is becoming a very serious situation. They're scared, Isabella replied. Little kids do that when they feel threatened. Threatened by whom? Daniel asked sharply. By people who want to help them? Isabella turned to him with a fury that had been suppressed for years. Help them, like you tried to help them when you said you were going to give one of them up for adoption because 2 kids were too much for you. That's a lie, Daniel exploded, but his reaction was too strong, too defensive. Robert looked between the two with growing professional interest. Were there discussions about adoption? Daniel wanted to separate the girls, Isabella said before her ex-husband could respond. He said twins were too much work, too expensive, that it would be easier to raise just one. That's completely distorted, Daniel protested. I simply suggested that if we couldn't give them both a proper life, maybe it would be better to find a family that could take better care of one of them. The silence that followed was heavy with horror. Even Eleanor seemed shocked by Daniel's inadvertent admission. So you actually considered separating twin children? Robert asked slowly. Daniel realized his mistake. Not in the way she's putting it. I was being practical about our financial limitations at the time. Financial limitations? Arthur interrupted. Daniel, you inherited half of Dad's business. What financial limitations? Things were different 4 years ago, Daniel said defensively. The company was going through difficulties. I was trying to build my career. And 2 babies were getting in the way of your plans, Isabella completed bitterly. At that moment, the sound of breaking branches came from the forest. Everyone turned to see Buddy emerging from the woods, panting but alert. The Labrador ran directly to Isabella and began barking in a specific way, short, sharp, repetitive. What is he trying to say? Robert asked. Isabella paled. He's saying there's danger. It's a bark Uncle Jacob taught him. She looked directly at Daniel. Buddy doesn't like it when you're around. Never has. It's just an animal, Daniel said dismissively, but Arthur noticed he took a step back as Buddy approached. Animals sense things humans sometimes miss, Robert observed, taking more notes. Ms. Reed, I need you to bring your daughters back. If you don't do it voluntarily, I'll have to call for backup. It was then that a small voice came from the edge of the forest. Mommy! Everyone turned to see Emily cautiously emerging from the trees, followed by Stella. Both were dirty, with leaves in their hair and small scratches on their arms, but clearly unharmed. We're hungry, Stella said simply, as if the last 2 hours of drama hadn't happened. Isabella ran to them and hugged them tightly. My dears, are you okay? We are, Emily replied, but her eyes were fixed on Daniel with an expression that was far too mature for a 4-year-old. But the bad man is still here. The innocent but direct accusation made Daniel stagger slightly. I'm not the bad man, he said, but his voice sounded weak. You made Mommy cry a lot, Stella said, and you wanted to separate us. That's what a bad man does. Robert observed the entire interaction with professional attention. Girls, do you remember your father? The twins looked at each other. He used to come to the house sometimes, Emily said, but he yelled at Mommy a lot. And one time he broke Mommy's favorite plate because she didn't want to let him take just Stella for a walk. I didn't want to separate you, Daniel said, but even to himself, the denial sounded desperate. Yes, you did, Stella said with the brutal honesty of children. You said I was the prettier one and that I could live in a big house, but Emily had to stay with Mommy. Eleanor covered her mouth with her hands, clearly shocked. Arthur felt nausea rising in his stomach as he realized the depth of the manipulation Daniel had attempted with such young children. "Mr. Vance," Robert said seriously, "these are very serious accusations. Attempting to separate twin children, especially using psychological manipulation." "They're children," Daniel exploded. "They don't understand complex adult contexts." "Children understand much more than we imagine," Robert retorted, "and what I'm hearing here suggests a pattern of disturbing behavior." Arthur approached the girls and crouched to their level. "Stella, Emily, can you tell me what it was like when Daddy Daniel tried to take only one of you?" "It was very scary," Emily said, her hands automatically finding Stella's. "He said that in the new house there was only room for one girl, and that I had to choose between staying with Mommy or staying with Stella." "But we could never choose," Stella added, "because you can't separate us. We're like a heart with two pieces." The simple but profound analogy touched everyone present. Even Daniel seemed momentarily affected by his daughter's description. "Girls," Robert said gently, "would you like to live with your father?" "No," they both replied simultaneously without hesitation. "And with your mother?" "Yes, always." "And if you could choose anywhere to live, where would it be?" The girls looked around the familiar property. "Here," Stella said, "with Mommy, with Buddy, and with Uncle Arthur, who's good to us." "Uncle Arthur. He brought food when we were hungry," Emily explained. "And he doesn't yell, and he doesn't want to separate us, and Buddy likes him." Robert made more notes, and Arthur could see that the assessment of the situation was changing. The children themselves were providing clear evidence of their preferences and fears. "Mr. Vance," Robert said finally, "based on what I've observed today, I cannot recommend that these children be placed in your care. In fact, I'm considering a temporary restraining order." "This is ridiculous," Daniel protested. "You're going to believe the fantasies of two 4-year-old children." "I'm going to believe in consistent behavioral evidence," Robert replied firmly. "And what I see here are two children who are afraid of one parent and trust the other." Daniel looked around, realizing he was losing control of the situation. His eyes met Eleanor's, who now watched him with an expression of deep disappointment. "Eleanor," he said desperately, "you understand I was just trying to do what's best." "No," she interrupted. "I don't understand. And for the first time, I'm seeing you as these children see you." Daniel's world was collapsing and he knew it. But in men like him, desperation often turns to anger, and Arthur could see that transformation happening in real time. "This isn't over," Daniel said quietly, but everyone could hear him. "There are things you don't know, secrets that will change everything." And with that veiled threat, he headed for his car, leaving everyone to wonder what other bombs he was prepared to detonate in the fight for control of Stella and Emily. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Daniel, and the yellow cabin had found a strange but functional routine. Robert Miller had granted temporary custody to Isabella, especially after witnessing the children's behavior and the revelations about Daniel's past. Arthur had become a constant presence, helping with practical care and emotional support for the small family. Eleanor, to everyone's surprise, including her own, had started visiting regularly, initially claiming she needed to supervise the situation due to the family's business interests. She gradually developed a genuine affection for the girls. On that particular morning, she arrived with new clothes for Stella and Emily, a radical change from the cold, calculating woman she had been months ago. "Aunt Eleanor!" the girls shouted when they saw her getting out of the car, running to hug her with the spontaneity only children possess. "Hello, my little ones," Eleanor said, crouching to receive them. Arthur watched with emotion as his wife's face lit up in the girl's presence. It was as if Stella and Emily had awakened a part of her that had been dormant since Leo's death. I brought a surprise for you, Eleanor said, opening a large box. Inside were two identical dresses in a soft blue that perfectly matched the girl's green eyes. They're the same, Stella exclaimed with joy. So no one can try to make us different, Emily added, showing a disturbing wisdom for her age. While the girls ran to show the dresses to Isabella, Eleanor approached Arthur with a serious expression. We need to talk, she said quietly. I've received some concerning information about Daniel. What kind of information? He's hiring private investigators, not just to find evidence against Isabella, but also to research the property's mineral rights. Eleanor paused, looking around to make sure she wasn't being overheard. Arthur, the deposits here are much more valuable than we imagined. We're talking about millions. Arthur felt his stomach sink, and Daniel knows this. He knows, and worse, he's discovered a legal loophole. If he can prove Isabella is an unfit mother, and if he gets custody of the girls, he can manage their estate until they turn 18. 14 years of mineral exploration, Arthur murmured. Exactly. And considering the value of the deposits, it would be enough to make him financially independent. He wouldn't need the family company anymore. At that moment, Isabella approached, clearly noticing the tension between the couple. Did something happen? Eleanor looked at Arthur, who nodded. They had decided to be honest with Isabella about the threats they faced. Isabella, Eleanor said gently, Daniel is stepping up his efforts to get custody of the girls. And now we know why. Stella and Emily's property is worth much more than anyone imagined. Isabella paled. How much? Potentially tens of millions, Arthur replied, and Daniel has found a legal way to access that money if he gets custody of them. My God, Isabella whispered, sinking into a porch chair. So he never cared about the girls as people. They were always just financial assets to him. It seems so, Eleanor confirmed sadly. At that moment, Stella and Emily appeared on the porch, wearing their new dresses and radiating happiness. Look how pretty we are, Stella said, spinning to show off the dress. You look beautiful, Isabella said, forcing a smile so as not to worry her daughters. Mummy, are you sad? Emily asked with that sharp sensitivity the two possessed. Just a little worried about grown-up things, Isabella replied. Nothing for you to worry about. But Emily approached and climbed onto Isabella's lap. Mommy, if you're worried, we get worried too. We're a family, remember? The simplicity of the statement deeply touched all the adults present. Arthur watched as Eleanor discreetly wiped away a tear and as Isabella hugged her daughter with desperate intensity. It was then that the sound of approaching cars broke the moment. This time, it wasn't just one vehicle, but three. The first was Daniel's silver sedan, followed by two cars Arthur didn't recognize. Hide the girls in the house, he said quickly to Isabella. Now! Isabella didn't question it. She took Stella and Emily and quickly led them inside, closing the door firmly. Buddy immediately took up a defensive position on the porch, his hackles raised. Daniel got out of the first car with a triumphant expression that Arthur didn't like at all. Two men in suits, who were clearly lawyers, got out of the second car. From the third vehicle emerged an elegant woman, whom Arthur vaguely recognized. It was Sandra, Daniel's current wife. Arthur, Eleanor, Daniel greeted formally. I brought some people you need to meet. One of the lawyers stepped forward. I'm Dr. August Mendonça, representing Mr. Daniel Vance in the custody case of his daughters. And I am Dr. Carla Santos, said the woman, a child psychologist specializing in cases of parental alienation. Eleanor exchanged an alarmed look with Arthur. Parental alienation. It's when one parent manipulates the children against the other, Dr. Carla explained. Based on the reports we've received, there are clear indications that the children are being influenced against their biological father." "That's ridiculous," Arthur said. "The girls are afraid of Daniel because of his behavior, not because of Isabella's manipulation. That will have to be determined through proper professional evaluations," Dr. Mendonça replied. "I'm here to inform you that we have filed a court request for the temporary removal of the children to a neutral environment while deeper investigations are conducted." At that moment, Sandra spoke for the first time. "Arthur, I know you have good intentions, but you're being used. Daniel told me about Isabella's psychological problems, about how she was always unstable." "What psychological problems?" Eleanor asked. "Severe postpartum depression, paranoid episodes, self-destructive tendencies." Sandra listed as if reciting a script. "Daniel had to protect the girls several times." "That's a lie," came Isabella's voice from inside the house. She had heard everything through the closed door. Dr. Mendonça consulted some papers. "We have medical documents that prove Ms. Reed's psychiatric treatment during and after her pregnancy." Arthur felt as if he were watching a carefully orchestrated trap closing around Isabella and the girls. "What documents? Where did they come from?" "From confidential but legitimate medical sources," the lawyer replied evasively. "Let me see those documents," Eleanor demanded. "This will be presented in the appropriate court," Dr. Mendonça said. "For now, we've come to take the children for psychological evaluation." It was then that the house door opened, and Isabella came out, holding Stella and Emily's hands firmly. Her face was pale, but her posture was determined. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "you want to destroy our family for money that badly? So be it, but I won't let you lie about me to get what you want." "Isabella, be sensible," Daniel said, trying to sound reasonable. "We just want what's best for the girls." "What's best for them," Isabella retorted, "is to stay away from you." Dr. Carla approached the girls. "Hello, Stella and Emily. I'm a doctor who works with children. I'd like to talk with you." The twins hid behind Isabella, clearly scared of all the strangers. "We don't want to talk," Stella said. "Sometimes talking to a doctor can help you better understand your feelings about your family," Dr. Carla continued in a syrupy voice. "We already understand our feelings," Emily said with impressive maturity. "We want to stay with our mom." "But what about your father?" the psychologist insisted. "Don't you miss him?" Stella looked directly at Daniel. "We don't miss people who make our mom cry." The simple, direct answer caused an awkward silence. Dr. Mendonça cleared his throat. "Regardless of the preferences expressed by the children, the legal process must run its course. We have a temporary court order that allows us to—" "You have no order," a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see Robert Miller approaching, accompanied by a woman Arthur didn't know. "This is Dr. Patricia Evans, a public defender specializing in children's rights," Robert announced. "And I've checked. There is no valid court order for the removal of these children." "Doctor," Mendonça looked uncomfortable. "The paperwork is being processed." "There is no paperwork," Dr. Evans said firmly, "and any attempt to remove these children without proper judicial authorization will constitute kidnapping." The color had drained from Daniel's face. His carefully planned trap was falling apart before his eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly, but the threat sounded more desperate than convincing. "No," Arthur agreed, positioning himself protectively between Daniel and the girls. "It's not over, but now we know exactly what kind of man you are." As Daniel and his entourage retreated, Arthur hugged Isabella and the girls, knowing they had won an important battle. But the war for the soul of Stella and Emily was far from over. The following month brought an apparent calm that made everyone nervous. Daniel had completely disappeared from the radar, making no more visits or sending lawyers. For Isabella, This quiet was even more terrifying than the direct confrontations, as she knew her ex-husband's tendency to plan elaborate revenges when he felt humiliated. Arthur had temporarily moved his base of operations closer to the yellow cabin, renting a property a few miles away. Officially, it was to supervise new development projects in the region, but everyone knew it was to be close in case Daniel tried something. Eleanor, to the continued surprise of everyone, including herself, had become a constant and genuinely caring presence in the girls' lives. On that Thursday morning, she arrived with a proposal that would change everything. "Isabella," she said, sitting on the porch while the girls played with Buddy in the yard, "I need to talk to you seriously about something." Isabella, who had learned to trust Eleanor over the weeks, stopped folding the clothes she was hanging on the line. "What is it?" "Arthur and I have talked a lot in recent weeks about Leo, about us, about what we lost and what we found." Eleanor paused, clearly struggling with deep emotions. "We want to make you a formal proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "We want to adopt Stella and Emily together, as a family." Isabella froze, a piece of the girl's clothing in her hands. "Adopt?" "Not take them from you," Eleanor hurried to say. "Adopt them together, a joint adoption. You would still be their mother, but they would also have the legal protection of being our daughters. Daniel couldn't touch them." The proposal caught Isabella completely off guard. "But it would mean you would be part of our family too," Eleanor said softly. "Not as an employee or a ward, but as a sister, as the mother of the girls I've grown to love as if they were my own." Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes. For years, she had felt completely alone in the world, fighting against forces much larger than herself. The idea of having true allies, a real family, was almost impossible to process. "Why would you do this?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Because Stella and Emily gave us back something we thought we had lost forever," Eleanor answered honestly, "the ability to love without fear. And because you are an extraordinary mother who deserves support, not a constant struggle." At that moment, Arthur approached, having overheard part of the conversation. "Isabella, the decision is entirely yours. But I want you to know this isn't out of pity or obligation. It's genuine love for these girls and deep respect for you." Isabella looked at Stella and Emily, who were teaching Buddy to fetch sticks. They looked happier and more secure than she had ever seen them. And the girls, what do they think about it? "Why don't we ask them?" Eleanor suggested. The twins were called to the porch, where they sat side by side with that natural synchronization they always showed. "Girls," Arthur began, "we want to talk to you about an important idea. How would you feel if Aunt Eleanor and I became your parents too, along with Mommy Isabella?" Stella frowned, trying to process the question. "Does that mean we'd have 3 parents?" "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. 3 people who would take care of you and love you forever." "And no one could separate us?" Emily asked, getting straight to the point that worried her most. "No one," Arthur promised. "Never." The girls exchanged one of those silent glances that preceded important decisions. Then Stella stood up and went to Eleanor. "Aunt Eleanor, would you also be sad if someone tried to take us away?" "I would be devastated," Eleanor answered honestly. "And would you fight to protect us?" "I would fight with all my strength," Emily joined her sister. "And Uncle Arthur, would you promise you'd never try to separate us from Mommy?" "I solemnly promise," Arthur said. "You 3 are a family. We just want to join that family." The girls returned to Isabella, whispered among themselves for a few moments, and then Stella announced the decision. "We want 3 parents, but only if Mommy wants it too." All eyes turned to Isabella. She looked at Arthur, who had genuinely become a protector and a friend. She looked at Eleanor, who had transformed from a potential enemy into an ally and almost a sister. She looked at her daughters, who deserved all the security and love the world could offer. "Yes," she said, her voice firm despite her tears. "Yes, I want that too." The impromptu celebration that followed was interrupted by the familiar sound of an approaching helicopter. But this time, when the aircraft landed, it was Robert Miller who got out, accompanied by an elegant woman no one recognized. "Sorry to interrupt," Robert said, approaching with a serious expression, "but I need to talk to all of you about an important discovery." The woman with him introduced herself. "I'm Dr. Marina Campos, a forensic investigator specializing in document fraud." Arthur felt a chill in his stomach. What kind of discovery? "About the medical documents Daniel's lawyer presented last time," Dr. Marina explained. "We found some significant irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" Eleanor asked. "They were forged," Robert said directly. "Not just altered, but completely fabricated. Isabella never had psychiatric treatment for the alleged reasons. In fact, the real medical records show she was a victim of domestic abuse." Isabella covered her face with her hands, but this time they were tears of relief. "Can you prove it?" "We can," Dr. Marina confirmed. "And there's more. During our investigation, we discovered that Daniel has a history of forging documents in other situations. He's also being investigated for business fraud." "My God," Arthur murmured. "What other situations?" "Construction contracts, mostly. It seems he has been systematically altering documents to favor his projects, harming partners and competitors." Eleanor paled. "Robert, does this mean our company could be compromised too?" "It's possible. We'll need a full audit of all the projects Daniel supervised over the last 5 years." At that moment, the girls, who had been playing quietly during the serious adult conversation, approached. "Mommy," Emily said, "the bad man won't be able to hurt us anymore." "No, my dear," Isabella replied, hugging both her daughters. "Never again." "And are we going to have our big family now?" Stella asked. "You are," Robert confirmed with a smile. "In fact, I brought the papers to formalize the joint adoption, if that's still what you want." Ooh. The afternoon that followed was a surreal mix of legal bureaucracy and family celebration. While the adults signed documents that would formalize the new family structure, Stella and Emily played in the yard, blissfully unaware of the historic importance of the moment. As the sun began to set over the lake, the new family, Arthur, Eleanor, Isabella, Stella, and Emily, sat on the porch of the yellow cabin watching Buddy chase butterflies in the garden. "Do you think Daniel will try anything when he finds out about the investigation?" Isabella asked. "Probably," Arthur replied. "But now he's facing much bigger problems than the girls' custody. Document fraud is a federal crime." "And we are united," Eleanor added, holding one of the girls' hands. "He can't divide us anymore." As the stars began to appear in the clear Nevada sky, Stella asked a question that perfectly summed up their journey. "Now that we're a real family, does that mean the sad stories are over?" Arthur looked around at his unlikely but genuine family. 2 brave girls, a mother who had fought against everything to protect them, a wife who had rediscovered her ability to love, and himself, a man who had found redemption in acts of protection and love. "It means the sad stories have turned into happy ones," he replied, "and that these happy stories are just beginning." But as the new family shared this moment of hard-won peace, none of them knew that Daniel was at that very moment making a desperate decision that would test the bonds they had just formed, in a way none of them could imagine. The call came at 5 in the morning, shattering the silence of the yellow cabin like an emergency siren. Arthur answered the phone on the second ring, his businessman's instinct always alert for morning crises. "Arthur," "You need to come to the city now," was the voice of his accountant, Carlos Mendez, filled with urgency. Daniel did something terrible, something that could destroy everything. "What are you talking about?" "He emptied the company accounts, all of them, and transferred the funds to offshore accounts before fleeing the country." Arthur felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "That's impossible. He doesn't have unilateral authorization to—" "He forged your signature and Eleanor's. We have copies of the fraudulent documents. Arthur, it's over $15 million. Vance Hotels is bankrupt overnight." The phone nearly slipped from Arthur's trembling hands. He looked around the house that had become his refuge, where his new family slept peacefully, unaware that their lives had just been turned upside down. Where is he now? No one knows. He and Sandra have disappeared. But Arthur, there's more. He left a letter, addressed to you, Eleanor and Isabella. "What letter?" "You'd better come here to read it in person." 2 hours later, Arthur was in the office of the company he had built over 20 years, looking at piles of paper that documented his brother's systematic betrayal. Eleanor had arrived a few minutes after him, bringing Isabella and the girls, because she didn't feel safe leaving them alone. Daniel's letter lay on the table, handwritten on company letterhead. "Arthur, Eleanor, and Isabella, if you are reading this, it's because my plan has been discovered. I didn't expect it to go this far, but you left me no choice. When you decided to unite against me, when you chose to protect those children instead of supporting family, you forced my hand. The money I took is not theft, it's my early inheritance. Dad always said the company would be divided equally between us when necessary. I'm just taking my share a little early. As for the girls, you think you've won, but you've actually lost everything. Without financial resources, how will you properly care for them? How will you pay for lawyers when the government discovers the irregularities I strategically left in various company documents? How will you maintain custody when you're facing investigations for tax fraud? Yes, I left evidence that implicates you in accounting irregularities. Not enough for prison, but enough to question your fitness as guardians. Isabella, you especially should understand, I have always won our battles. Always. And this time will be no different. The girls deserve parents who can provide financial stability. When you lose everything, when you can no longer care for them properly, I'll be waiting. With resources, with stability, with everything they need. You forced me to become the villain of this story. But maybe I always was. Daniel P.S. The mineral deposits on the girls' property are much more complex than you imagine. There are environmental and legal issues that will make exploration nearly impossible without heavy investment. Good luck turning rocks into gold without capital. The silence that followed the reading of the letter was broken only by the sound of the girls playing in the waiting room, completely oblivious to the hurricane that had destroyed the adults' lives. "He planned everything," Eleanor murmured, her voice laced with a mixture of perverse admiration and horror. "Every move, every contingency." "Carlos," Arthur said, turning to the accountant, "what are our options?" "Legally, we can try to sue for fraud, but he's out of the country. Financially, Arthur, you've lost everything. The house, the cars, the properties, everything was tied to the company's collateral." Isabella, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "And the yellow cabin. The girls' property?" "That's safe," Carlos confirmed. "It's in their names. It can't be touched by your company's creditors." "Then we have a place to live," Isabella said pragmatically. "And the girls still have their inheritance." "An inheritance that Daniel just made inaccessible," Eleanor reminded her bitterly. "If he's right about the legal complications of mining." "Then we'll find other ways," Arthur interrupted, with a determination that surprised even himself. "Daniel may have taken our money, but he didn't take our family." At that moment, Stella appeared at the office door. "Uncle Arthur, when are we going home? Buddy is waiting for us." The innocence of the question hit all the adults like a stab. How do you explain to two 4-year-old children that the man who should have protected them had instead systematically destroyed the lives of everyone who loved them? "We're going soon, my dear," Arthur replied, crouching to her level. "We're just sorting out some boring adult stuff." "Did Daddy Daniel make you sad?" Stella asked with that sharp perception she always showed. The question caught everyone off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "Because Emily said she dreamed about him last night, and in the dream he was taking all our things away." Arthur exchanged an alarmed look with Eleanor. Did the girl's special connection include premonitory dreams? "Stella," Isabella said carefully, "can you call Emily here? We want to talk to both of you." A few minutes later, both girls were sitting in the office, observing the serious faces of the adults around them. "Girls," Arthur began, "we're going to have to go through some difficult times. Daddy Daniel did some bad things that are going to change our lives." "Did he take our money?" Emily asked directly. "How do you know that?" "Because in my dream he was carrying bags full of shiny things. And when I woke up, I felt that something bad had happened." Eleanor knelt beside the girls. "What Daddy Daniel did means we won't have the big house in the city anymore, or the nice cars. We're going to have to live just in the yellow cabin, and things will be simpler." "Does that mean you won't be able to take care of us anymore?" Stella asked, going straight to the heart of her biggest fear. "Never," Arthur said emphatically. "It means we'll take care of you differently, but we will never abandon you." "And it means we are stronger than Daddy Daniel," Isabella added, "because we have real love and he only has money." Emily thought about this for a moment. Is love more important than money? Much more important. Eleanor confirmed. Money can be taken away, but true love can't. "So we won and he lost," Stella concluded, with the simple logic of children. The girls' observation brought an unexpected perspective to the devastating situation. They were right. Daniel had won a financial battle, but he had lost something far more precious, the chance to have a real family. On the drive back to the yellow cabin, squeezed into the only car they still owned, which was fortunately in the accounting firm's name, the new reality began to set in. They would have to start from scratch, find simple ways to live, build a life based on love and limited resources. "You know something?" Eleanor said, looking out the window at the mountains surrounding Lake Tahoe. "I haven't felt this free in years." "Free from what?" Isabella asked. "Free from the pressure to keep up appearances, to manage complicated businesses, to constantly worry about money." She smiled, and Arthur realized it was the first genuinely relaxed smile he had seen on her face in a long time. "Maybe Daniel gave us a gift without realizing it." "A very expensive gift," Arthur observed, "but maybe it's worth it." When they arrived at the yellow cabin, Buddy was waiting for them in the yard, running in circles of joy. The girls jumped out of the car and ran to hug the Labrador, their laughter echoing over the quiet lake. At that moment, watching his unlikely family gathered in the yard of the simple house that would now be their only home, Arthur realized that Eleanor was right. Daniel had taken their money, but he had left something far more valuable. A family united by adversity, strengthened by love, and determined to build a new life together. The war with Daniel was far from over, but they had discovered something he would never understand, that the greatest victories are not measured in bank accounts, but in united hearts. 6 months after Daniel's devastating betrayal, the yellow cabin had transformed into something none of them could have imagined: a true home. The simple lakeside property now housed a small family inn that Arthur and Eleanor had built with their own hands, aided by local workers who agreed to be paid with percentages of future profits. The idea had come from Isabella one morning as they watched lost tourists looking for accommodation in the area. "Why don't we offer lodging here?" she had suggested. "The lake view is beautiful, and we have enough space." What began as financial desperation had turned into something much more significant, a new way of life based on simplicity, honest work, and genuine human connections. On that December morning, exactly 1 year after Arthur had first discovered the girls, the family was busy preparing the house for a special group of guests. Robert Miller had become a regular visitor, often bringing colleagues from social work who needed a quiet place to rest. Today, he was arriving with Dr. Patricia Evans and a surprise he had promised but refused to reveal. "Mommy Isabella, the cookies are almost ready," Stella announced, running from the kitchen with her hands covered in flour. At 5, she had become an enthusiastic little culinary assistant. "And I arranged all the flowers in the rooms," added Emily, who had developed a passion for gardening and decorating. Eleanor, who had never imagined she would one day be content helping to run a small inn, smiled as she organized the clean towels. "You two are the best helpers anyone could have." Arthur came in carrying firewood for the fireplace. The manual labor had transformed his body, and more importantly, his perspective on what truly mattered in life. "Robert just called. They're arriving in an hour." "Did he say who the surprise is?" Isabella asked, taking the cookies out of the oven. "No, just that it's someone coming from very far away specifically to meet our family." The sound of approaching cars interrupted the speculation, but instead of 2 vehicles as expected, there were 3. Robert got out of the first with Dr. Evans, but the surprise emerged from the second car. A woman in her 60s with graying hair and a gentle smile, accompanied by a man of the same age. From the third car, to everyone's absolute astonishment, came 2 figures no one expected to see again, Daniel and Sandra. But there was something drastically different about them. Daniel seemed to have aged a decade in 6 months. His hair was graying, and he walked with the stooped posture of someone who had carried a terrible weight. Sandra was too thin, with eyes that showed signs of much crying. The girls, who were playing in the yard, stopped immediately upon seeing Daniel. Instead of running to hide as they would have months ago, they simply stood still, watching, secure in the knowledge that their family would protect them. "Arthur," Robert said, approaching carefully, "there are some important things that need to be discussed, and some people you need to meet." The elderly woman approached, and when she spoke, her voice had a soft accent Arthur couldn't place. "My name is Carmen Reed. I am Isabella's maternal grandmother, and this is my husband, Mr. Antonio." Isabella dropped the tray of cookies she was carrying. "Grandma Carmen, but we thought you had passed on." "No, my dear. I've been living in Portugal for the last 15 years, taking care of Antonio's family, but when I heard what happened to you and my great-granddaughters," her tears began to flow. "I came as fast as I could. How did you find out?" It was Daniel who answered, his voice broken and unrecognizable. "I told her." Everyone turned to him in astonishment. Robert gestured for them to sit on the porch, clearly prepared for a long and complex conversation. "Daniel contacted us 3 months ago," Robert explained. "He was in a very difficult situation abroad." "I was tricked," Daniel said, his voice almost a whisper. "The people who helped me transfer the money, they robbed me, everything, and when I tried to return to the States, I found out I was being investigated for crimes I didn't commit." Sandra spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. "We lost everything, and worse. We discovered things about ourselves that made us deeply ashamed." "What things?" Eleanor asked, her voice cautious but not hostile. "We discovered that Daniel was right about one thing," Sandra said. "He really did have psychological problems, but they weren't problems that justified what he did. They were problems he should have treated instead of using to hurt other people." Daniel looked up to meet Arthur's eyes. "Brother, I don't even know where to begin to ask for forgiveness." Start by explaining why you're here, Arthur replied, his voice neutral. Because when I lost everything, when I was alone and scared in a foreign country, I finally understood what you all tried to tell me. Family isn't about money or control. It's about this. He gestured to the yellow cabin, to the girls playing safely, to the simple but rich life they had built, and I threw it all away for greed. Grandma Carmen approached Stella and Emily, who were watching her with curiosity. "My little great-granddaughters," she said softly, "you are even more beautiful than I imagined." "Are you our real great-grandma?" Stella asked. "I am, and I came from very far away to meet you and to try to fix some mistakes our family made." It was then that Antonio opened a folder he was carrying. "We brought some important documents," he said. "Documents that prove the mineral rights on this property are more valuable than anyone imagined, and also documents that show there are legal and environmentally responsible ways to develop them. More importantly," Carmen added, "we brought a proposal. Antonio and I want to finance the proper development of this property's resources, not to get rich, but to ensure that Stella and Emily have resources for education, medical care, and everything they need. But there's one condition," Antonio said. "The resources can only be accessed if the family stays united. Everyone, including Daniel, if you are willing to forgive him." The silence that followed was heavy with complex emotions. Arthur looked at Eleanor, who looked at Isabella, who looked at the girls. "Why would you do this?" Isabella asked her grandparents. "Because when Antonio and I got married, we also faced family opposition," Carmen replied. "And we learned that families broken by pride and misunderstandings never truly heal. We want you to have the chance that we didn't give our generation." Stella approached Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. "Daddy Daniel," she said, "do you still want to separate us?" "No," he replied, tears streaming down his face. I just want the chance to learn how to be a real father, if you'll let me." Emily joined her sister. "And do you promise you'll never try to take our things away again?" "I promise. I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to give back what I took from you." The girls looked at each other, had one of their silent conversations, and then Stella spoke. "Okay, but you have to live here with us so we can learn to trust you again." The simplicity of the solution proposed by the children surprised all the adults. There was no drama, no revenge, just the practical wisdom of children who wanted their family to be whole. Robert smiled. "Actually, that solves several legal problems as well. If Daniel is under family supervision, it will be easier to resolve the pending issues with the justice system." As the sun began to set over the lake, something extraordinary happened. The family that had been torn apart by trauma, rebuilt by love, tested by betrayal, and broken by greed, finally found its way back to wholeness. It wouldn't be easy. There would be many difficult conversations, a lot of work to rebuild trust, moments of doubt and anger. But as they watched Stella and Emily teaching Daniel the stick game that Buddy loved, they all knew they had chosen the right path. "You know what I learned this year?" Eleanor said to Arthur as they prepared dinner for the extended family. "What? That sometimes we need to lose everything to find out what's really worth having." Arthur looked around the simple kitchen of the yellow cabin, hearing the voices of his family, all of them, including the most unlikely ones, echoing through the house. Outside, the girls ran in the yard with Buddy, their laughter mixing with the sound of the lake lapping against the shore. "And was it worth it?" he asked. "Every second of suffering," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Every tear, every moment of fear, every sleepless night. It was all worth it to get here." That night, For the first time in over a year, Stella and Emily slept with the absolute certainty that they were safe, loved, and would never be separated. And for the first time in their lives, they had a truly complete family, imperfect, complicated, but united by the kind of love that is only possible when people choose forgiveness over revenge, hope over bitterness, and family over everything else. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.